we'll be moving on to the last panel, the limits of sovereignty in a global world, how to build multilateral international relations. So, as you see, the topic of the panel is not about protecting sovereignty, it is also, but it's also about a realistic approach to a world when full sovereignty is no more possible. What are the limits, what are the boundaries, and what are the risks and threats for the sovereignty? And I will start to introduce our panelists and our guests. Georgi Harizanov, CEO of Bulgarian Institute of Right-Wing Politics, expert and analyst on international politics. Professor István Stumpf, constitutional lawyer, political scientist, university professor, member of the Hungarian Prime Minister's Strategic Advisory Council. Let us join in the panel at the podium. Henri Mellot, a French politician and social activist, former president of the Economic and Social Committee, chairman of the steering committee of the Jean Monnet Association. And Daniele Scalia, president of the Machiavelli Center for Political and Strategic Studies, expert in political science, author of numerous essays. And finally, Magor Erni, international director at the Center for Fundamental Rights, former deputy chief of mission at the Embassy of Hungary in Washington. Let me start with a very short introduction, and then I will ask you to present the opening remarks of this panel. Every student, university degree student of the international law or international politics learns that there was a time in Europe where sovereignty was not an issue. It was a time of Christianitas. It was a time of unified Christian empire ruled by two swords, ruled by the Pope and by the Emperor. And then, of course, came the revolution. And after 100 years of religious wars, a new order emerged, an order of sovereign states and sovereign leaders, sovereign monarchs. It was a Westphalian order. And the Westphalian order was somehow a solution to the age of strife. Today, this solution is being criticized as a source of tensions, as a source of war, and in fact, as a source of fascism going back the politics of Europe. We already mentioned in every of our panels, and it was the aim of the seminar and conference, 267 amendments, but we haven't mentioned the preamble to that. The resolution of the European Parliament from November last year starts with very specific quotation. In the first points of the preamble, only one philosophical treaty is invoked. This single philosophical treaty is Manifesto of Ventotene. No other document has been invoked. And Manifesto of Ventotene by Altiero Spinelli, it's a document from early 40s, the document that has nothing to do, theoretically, with economical union of European Union, but it is a document that criticizes the Westphalian order of sovereign states. It is the document, its author was an open Trotskyist communist, that calls for abolition of nations, removal of borders, abolition of property, replacement of democracy with the dictatorship of a European party, and the creation of a new European man, free of nationality, given a new identity, new European identity, free from religion, free from national identities. This is a new sovereignty, a sovereignty of an artificially built superstate that is an offering given to us, that is proposal given to us in this resolution of the European Parliament, resolution that officially triggered the Lisbon Treaty procedure for amendment of treaties. And that is the question. How far it is possible to go back to sovereignty? What is the position of the sovereign states today? What can we do with European Union? Where is it heading? And how important is sovereignty for protection of our nations and our national interests? And let me start with the remarks from Georgi Harizanov, and then we will be following up with each of the panelists for the opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Kwasniewski. First of all, let me say it's an honor and great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much once again for the invitation. You, the Heritage, Mr. Carafano, everyone. Look, a team is as strong as the players who are forming it. So strengthening the national countries and keeping sovereignty is crucial. It's not important, it's crucial. Because the strength of the union depends on how strong are the countries who are inside of that union. You don't want a European Union which is formed by weak countries, weak economies, weak armies, weak cultures. The problem that we in Bulgaria face as a relatively newly accepted member of NATO and the EU is that in the past we had this romantic idea that we are joining these strong unions and we protect ourselves and our allies from the enemies and competitors on the outside. Basically, what's happening in the past years is that we have to protect ourselves from our allies, which is a situation that we have never accepted to be in. First of all, European Union and Bulgarian, especially transport business, by the way, this was the thing that we were very strong allies with Poland and Hungary and so on, was basically dissolved because it's formed as a union of peace, a purpose which it serves perfectly since the day it was established, but also as an economic union of free trade and free movement of people, capitals, and goods. And since 2019, because of the pressure of the French transport sector, our ally in both NATO and the EU, we were forced to bring our empty trucks back from the EU each month. And this is basically the moment that one of the core values of the EU, the free movement of goods, people and capital, ended. And it ended because of trade wars inside the EU, because after all, people quite often forget that we are also competitors inside the European Union. We are friends, we are allies, but we are also competitors. Then, in regards to everything that Mr. Carafano said, there comes NATO. NATO was a subject with a huge consensus inside Bulgaria back in the years where we became members. I'm not sure it's quite like this today, and one of the problems is that our allies in NATO are not acting in some constant mode or some constant regime. The situation changes very quickly. First, you have President Trump who comes here, meets Ms. Merkel, and says, look, stop flooding the Russians with money, take care of your own security, they will become rich, they will become, their self-esteem will grow, one day they will attack you, and I'm not going to be the one who saves you with the money of my taxpayers. And back then, as you remember, everyone was, oh, why is this hooligan talking to this nice lady like this? Everything he said was true, and it happens exactly as he said it. And Mr. Carafano is saying, yeah, NATO is a joint union, everyone is, yeah. But my fellows from my institute were invited in NATO's headquarters, and in the corridors, they were intercepted by these Albright, Clinton, Newland wannabes, who told them, look, stop pushing, this European narrative that much. We have 70% weight in NATO. We have 70% of the appointments. We have 70% weight in making the decisions. We don't really like this talking about this strong Europe. Stay in your lane. So which is it? And this happened even when Trump was still in power. because, as you know, the bureaucracy there is not always appointed or singing in the same chorus with the president. So then came the year 2021, where 3 times in a row, the American diplomats in Bulgaria interfered in our elections openly. I was very entertained when 3 months ago Ms. Nurant resigned and says we never interfered in elections. This is precisely what you are doing, come on. 3 times in a row, 3 campaigns in a row. At the beginning of the first day of the campaign, there was some strong move from the American embassy and the American government regarding Bulgaria, every time against the Christian Democrats and every time in favor of the globalist liberal powers. Every time, each time. For which she was tapped by the shoulder on the Inspector General of the State Department when he evaluated her mandate in Bulgaria. So, okay, let's make strong unions. Okay, let's be allies. Don't we have common enemies? Don't we have common competitors? I believe we all know who the enemy is on the war terrain, and we all know who the competitors are on the economy terrain. So yes, it's extremely important for us to keep our sovereignty, and it's extremely important to once again remember what unions are and that we are allies and stop beating between each other, because if you open up the European media, there is a very strong competition between Poland and Hungary, which is the biggest problem of the EU right now. And I don't believe those countries are the biggest problem of the EU right now. I believe we have much bigger ones, and we should start acting like allies and restore the Union again by being strong, independent states. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Stumpf, as a constitutional lawyer, you are experiencing from first hand this meaning of sovereignty in European Union of a country that is targeted by international politics of European Union and by international standards of European Union that growingly become weaponized since 2000 and Austrian case and Austrian elections. What is the meaning of sovereignty in this new arrangement of powers, especially inside of European Union?
First of all, I also would like to thank you for the invitation and congratulations for your report, which is summarizing most of the questions which we are facing when we would like to defend the sovereignty of the member states. I just also would like to let you know that one of the leading Hungarian think tank is going to publish the report about the rule of law situation in the European institution the last 5 years, collecting those kind of violations which the European Union institution committed against the rule of law. So I think we are just talking about that there are different kind of procedures against on the behalf of the rule of law against the member state, but what the European Union institution doing violating the rule of law, nobody mentioned quite clearly. This report is going to do that, and when they are going to publish it, I am going to send you, and you can collect those materials. So that's right. The recent development around the revision of the treaties and also dispute about the supremacy of the EU law over the member state constitutions created an urgent need for reflection and re-evaluation of our priorities in the EU political landscape. My thesis is the following. The European community is approaching the constitutional tipping point. The weaponization of the rule of law and increasing attack on the member state sovereignty paralleled with the overgrowing of the EU bureaucracy, exposing the thinly wide federalist desire which still dominated the Brussels mainstream. So I think that the Brussels mainstream and the Brussels bureaucracy is very much like a deep state in the United States or the shadow state in the United States, occupying those kind of area which is the area of the elected politicians. So they have no right, not legitimized to do that. In my view, as a constitutional law scholar and former justice of the Hungarian Constitutional Court, the ultimate imperative for the conservative is that we shall not cede any more authority over the national constitutional matters into the hands of the European institution. The protection of the constitutional identity is key in the larger battle of preserving the national identity. Constitutions serve as a profound declaration of the political and cultural values. They create a community and a sense of belonging. Therefore, it's not surprised that the constitutional identity and authority over the national constitutional matters have become the primary targets. The legal conclusion of the trend is that the national constitutional courts will become the most important player in struggle between the federalism and the national sovereignism in the European politics. We haven't crossed the Rubicon yet, but we are rapidly approaching it, and the conservatives must be ready for these occasions. We have numerous examples in the EU institution either overstepping their jurisdiction or going entirely against not just the spirit, but the written text of the treaties. The selective approach employed by the European Commission withhold the funds from the member state in clearly violation of the treaties. The aversion of the veto rights in the Council is also the violation of the treaties. The push by the European Parliament in the middle in the question of the national sovereignty of the member state is once again a violation of the treaties. The clear-cut example of how the European institutions trample on the ideas of democracy and the rule of law. The Brussels behemoth has no regard for the treaties or the values they once ensured. They only abide the rules as long as it serves their federalist ambitions. In the battle for the existence of the nation state, we must be aware about any possible threats to sovereignty, and we must also prepare for fight it with the tools appropriate for such a task. That will be the short description. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And in fact, Hungary and Poland, at least for 8 years, stood strong with their sovereignty against those efforts of European forces. Mr. Malos, I remember our last meeting in this hub of common sense meeting in Budapest a year ago or half a year ago during a conference dedicated to some EU issues, and I was very much interested in your personal experiences in growing European behemoth, as Professor Sturm just described it. It would be very interesting to see this perspective on European Union that you have as an insider from 80s till today, through Maastricht, through Lisbon Treaty, until the new amendments proposed by the European Parliament.
Dziękuję bardzo. Jeśli pozwolę mi Państwu po polsku. Okej, ja lepiej po angielsku teraz. Może, no ja bardzo dziękuję Ordo Iuris za to zaproszenie. Dlatego to jest coś dziwnego. Jeszcze dziwię się sam, że ja jestem pasja mojego życia to jest europejska integracja. Ja jestem pro-Europej, ale ja jestem pozytywny krytyk. I am a positive critic of the European Union, and my experience, first of all, just 2 words, I have a personal experience in Poland. In the 80s, I was harassed by SB, the Polish KGB of a communist regime. I was banned in Poland between 81 and 90, and suffer with my family also from the communist regime. So this is why on that, no lesson to receive on anybody about that. But as you mentioned, I was a fighter for European integration. I've had the honor to be one of the presidents of a European institution. It's the 6th European institution, or 5th, depends on protocols, European Economic and Social Committee. But I remember that at that time, it was 10 years ago, my first official visit was to Hungary, and was to his Prime Minister, Viktor Orban. And I was strongly criticized by some others, head of other European institutions, because my first visit was to Hungary, because at that time, it was in 2014, nobody wanted to go already to Budapest because they start to criticize what I thought very good family politic policies, very good policies to support small métiers, small business, middle class in Hungary. The European Commission already at that time didn't like that, but I like that. And my second quality that you mentioned is to be chair of a steering committee of the Jean Monnet Association. You know, which Jean Monnet is a founding father of the European integration. But to be honest, of course, it's difficult to wake up someone who died in '79. But I think if he came back today, came back to Brussels, he will be very surprised by what happened. First of all, just something that is not very known, but Jean Monnet hated the European public administration. He left the haute autorité, high authority, was the ancestor of the European Commission, in 1956. One of the reasons, it's because there was this project to develop the European public administration. He was against. He thought that if we have a European public administration, that means people making career in Brussels, they will start to have a European bureaucracy. What happened? He was in favor of administration mission, people coming from the private sector or from the national public sector for a short time, working in Brussels and then back, not to lose their origin, not to lose their knowledge. And also, when I see today what the European Union has become, I remember when I came first time as a stagiaire, I didn't know anybody, didn't have any connection, nothing. In '79, it was a long time ago, I was there with a lot of passion, with a lot of hopes, to build something in common among all people, among all nations, among all citizens, or women and men. I didn't come to Brussels in '79 to consecrate all my life for discussion or for promotion of LGBT rights or a work agenda. We had concrete hopes to build peace, and very thankful to Hungarian Prime Minister, to as President of Council of Ministers, to start again this peace mission. And I participated to the peace march we had this some months ago in Budapest. I was there to promote wealth among all European nations. I was so happy when there was the end of the Berlin Wall, and that we could have free speech, liberty, free democratic election in the East. This reunification of the European continent was one of my dreams. But what's happened in 3 minutes more? 3 more minutes. What happens that at the beginning, we had the idea of Jean Monnet, Schuman, and the others, were to build on concrete steps where the member state will decide sovereignty, to transfer some competence, some sovereignty in some key policies with agreement of all the participants to make better health, better future for citizens. Common agriculture policy, for example, transport policy. And I will give you one example. And we stopped that. Since the, I would say, end of the 90s, we stopped to build any concrete policies for the benefit of the European citizens. And I will give you a very concrete example, which is very close to my heart. I'm living in Corsica, in the Mediterranean region, where we have to suffer, not in Corsica this time, but in Portugal now, very heavy fires because of a dry, because of a wind, because of a heat, and every year the same. Do you know that 20 years ago, Michel Barnier and myself, you know, Michel Barnier is the actual Prime Minister of France, who has some problems to build a government, but Michel Barnier and myself, we made a report for 17 years ago, a report for the European Commission to build a European task force for civil protection to fight against forest fires, against, I would say, devastation from this kind of catastrophe. This report is still in the cupboard of the Berlaymont. Nothing had happened. Today, Portugal is fighting with very short means against a terrible fire. I think there's already 7 to 10 persons died. And we know that each of our countries doesn't have the means in the Mediterranean, but everywhere, also in Poland, doesn't have all the necessary means, I would say, by airplane, by special airplanes, by firemen to fight against a very heavy fire. So this was a project that we put together, Michel Barnier and myself, to the European Commission. Let's create something concrete. As we did something concrete, you mentioned Erasmus. I think Erasmus was the last concrete positive project of the European Union. It was 30 years ago. What's happened from the time? Nothing. And I think the main problem is that in the idea of Jean Monnet, Schuman, and the founding fathers, there was a clear, as you mentioned, a clear presentation in the treaty that or we do something in common policy, we decide to do something together, which is for the benefit of our citizens, or we keep the sovereignty and the national activity responsibility in the national government. But since end of the 90s, we have developed this concept of shared responsibility, where member states are doing something and the EU is doing something else. And we have a very good example, I will finish by that, because you mentioned international affairs, where we create this useless European diplomacy. Today in foreign countries, like in Washington, you don't have 27 embassies of the European Union, you have 28. You are each of the member states plus the EU, and sometimes they do something different. This is totally useless. What is the benefit, of activity of Mr. Borrell, of some Spanish here, representative? What is his added value to the European, to the international, I will say, situation? Nothing. It just creates confusion. We could ask some member state, if you would like, to work together to be more active. For example, in the question of Ukraine, we see very well which countries have the knowledge because they are close to the border and they have, how do we say, the intelligence of what happened. Same thing for Africa, same thing for Latin America. It will be much more efficient than this useless bureaucracy. So this is why I would say, as a conclusion, as former president of the European institution, as a chair of Jean Monnet Association, I think that the work you are doing here, although I don't agree on everything what was said, but that's normal. Your work where you're doing is very important, but just don't forget that it should be focused not to destroy the European integration, which brings a lot of fruitful results in the early 60s, 70s, 80s, but to change it, and to change it with a new approach and a conservative approach, an approach for the benefit of European nations and citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And what is, for me, the most important part of what you said is this meaning of European cooperation as a multilateral, consensual effort. That was the spirit of the cooperation for decades, and then taken over by a centrally governed bureaucratic structures of Brussels since late 90s and later. And just to present the outcomes of the possible outcomes of those amendments accepted by the European Parliament, taking over foreign affairs by Brussels will make it easier to have only one embassy instead of 28 in Washington, and one embassy of European Union and none of the embassies of sovereign states. The next part of this panel is an important question, and it's good that it will be addressed to Daniele Scalia, because Italy now is one of those countries voicing their concern and raising strong voice on family issues as well. And sovereignty is also a safeguarding factor against international utopian projects that were mentioned in the third panel. And some of them are promoted by supernatural bodies as European Union. What is the strength of sovereignty in this context?
Well, first of all, I would like to add my voice to those congratulating with you, because Ordo Iuris is doing really a terrific job in monitoring the European Union. Your reports are always very useful, also for us, for think tanks in other countries of Europe. You spare us a lot of work. Frequently, we do not our research, just go to see what you wrote. So, coming to your question, well, naturally shifting the decision-making from the national level to the supranational level is enabling the pursuit of ideologically driven utopia, as the one you mentioned. Clearly, because at the national level you have better control by the citizens. So what is the average citizen, the average man or woman asking to his politicians, to the politicians, just to take care of my interest, do my best practical interest? Very seldomly they are asking for, ideological crusades or something like that. Instead, on the European Union level, the scrutiny is very lower. They have free rein on their ideological agenda. What one clearly realized and perceived in reading your last report is that the EU establishment, after that the Constitution was rejected by the peoples of Europe, have just decided to go on with forming a government, forming a European government, leaving aside the Constitution. So we are going towards a government without a Constitution. Something sounds wrong, something in that. History, that is always the best teacher, has taught us that when you have a government that can unrestrainingly pursuing their ideological agenda, usually that's not very good. We can think of Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia. I guess that you in Poland have some clues on that. So someone could object that the EU elite is not, it's not Nazi, it's not Soviet. Well, okay, let's consider also what are the the deeper roots of the woke ideology that is now preeminent in the European Union. Is clearly Marxism, as many have mentioned before. You can see what is happening, for example, in Poland, towards the opposition. And you can see how in Germany is treated the right-wing opposition by, not just the government, but in general, all the security apparatus. If we enlarge the side also outside the European Union, we have seen, breakdown in Britain. We've seen what's happening in Brazil, what's happening in the United States, with a double attempt to the life of the opposition candidate. So it seems to me that we are witnessing a sort of authoritarian turn. And so if it has ever been wise to give unrestrained power to your ruler, for sure this is not the best moment to do it. What kind of utopia would most probably pursuing a European Union government. Well, more generally speaking, we could think of globalism, that is, try to create just one big world government. That means both enlarge the cleavage between the citizens and the rulers, so less democracy, and also it means that they are going to rule with not in mind the best interest of the European citizens, but what they perceived as the best interest of all the world population, that in reality is just the best interest of the global elite. But in a shorter time span, I expect that if Trump is going to win in November in the United States, we will see an attempt to distance the European Union from the United States. We have seen something also during the first term of Trump, with the EU establishment some way flirting with China, and not only China. They become very vocally critics of the real alliance, the real concept of alliance, strategic alliance with the United States. So if they are going to split Europe from the United States, this means that also countries, like all the Eastern European countries that perceive themselves as threatened by Russia, and that so they really value the shield by the United States, are going to be obliged to have these relation cut. And this is partially good. It is definitely true also for the southern flank. We do not have, as Italy, for example, a big threatening power on the southern flank, but there are a lot of threats from the Islamists, some countries that are not clearly trustworthy, Iran, and so on. Also, for us, it's good to have this type of support by the United States. If we are going to trust for our interest in the Mediterranean, other countries, namely France or Germany, it wouldn't be the same. In Italy, we still remember very well what happened a dozen years ago in 2011, when Italy used to have strategic cooperation with Libya that was important not only for business, not only for strategical supply of oil and gas, but also because Libya was cooperating in getting illegal migrants out of our shores. At that time, other European countries, like France, Sarkozy's France, seeing Libya most probably the opportunity to enlarge the sphere of influence at cost, at expense of Italy, and they push NATO to attack Gaddafi, to support the Islamist rebels. What we actually have obtained is that Libya collapsed as a state, that hundreds of thousands of illegals reach our shores. So that's why we do not really trust some other European, I wouldn't say countries, because government, not just countries, because if, in France is going to change the government, then we can trust them, but not in the current situation. The last thing I would like to say, since we are speaking of migration, foreign policy is very important also on migration issues, especially for Italy, since we have lost almost every legal tools that we used to enjoy. Italy used to just push back the boats of migrants. You intercept the boats and just send them back from where they come from. That was ruled as illegal by the European Court for the Human Rights in 2012. We have a lot of criticism by the European Commission and the European Union in general, the European Union Parliament, with our methods in tackling with these NGOs, ships that are bringing illegals on our shores. So one of the few tools that is still in Italy's hands is foreign policy. Meloni is using the foreign policy in this way. She has made agreement with Tunisia, with Libya, both governments in Libya, with Egypt, that are instrumental in curbing in more or less half the arrivals during this year in comparison with the last year. So if the foreign affairs are just going to become the exclusive competence of the European Union government, clearly hegemonized by Germany and France, maybe the leftist government, Spain, that's definitely not good for us, also in relation with migrations.
Thank you very much. It is important to remember that this is not only those grand ideologies that we are facing, coming from the supernatural, supranational bodies, but also those ideologies concerning migration that may be thwarted or fought against on the national level with our sovereign powers, and that would be implemented if we give up our sovereign powers to Brussels. But going back to transatlantic cooperation, sovereignty plays also a role in building up strong, running deep international relations and alliances. And that's a question for Magor Erni.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much, Jerzy and Jim Carfano, for putting together this excellent conference, because it is really timely. We don't have too many platforms where Europeans and Americans can come together and discuss matters of values, security, EU-US relations. For some reason, all these topics have been hijacked by liberals, so it is really a very timely discussion today, and it's a very good networking opportunity for all of us, just right before the US presidential elections. Our hope is that starting from next year, we will be able to continue this discussion and put these ideas also into practice with some of our friends in the United States. Regarding your question to the relevance of national sovereignty in the transatlantic context, as you know, we're organizers of CPAC Hungary, so we interact with many of these organizations in the United States. And of course, we detect that sometimes there are some more important foreign policy questions than the EU. But, Jerzy, I totally agree with you. This should have a relevance. I mean, the national sovereignty of the European states should have a relevance also for the American audience, because they're also deeply impacted by some of the decisions that are made here in the European Union. So if Brussels comes up with some crazy stuff on green policy, their buddies in California will do the same. So, and vice versa. So we have to be very careful, and we have to make sure that we conservatives and sovereigntists on both sides of the Atlantic have a dialogue. And let me address this issue on different levels, because if we take, for instance, Central Europe and the way we think here, and we take a look at, let's say, the American Midwest, probably we can find more common ground with some of the progressives. We can find more common ground with those living in the Midwest than with those progressives living in some Western European capitals. So it's really important. This link is really important. And I think one of the fundamental issues is the values questions. Transatlantic cooperation, and it's actually the West. So let's talk about national sovereignty in the West. One of the fundamental questions is our Judeo-Christian heritage, because our entire Western civilization is built upon these values. Our democracies are built upon these values. And what we see here in Europe, just remember when the EU constitution was drafted and some of the EU treaties were drafted, any relevance to God was just neglected and put aside. Whereas the Judeo-Christian heritage actually has some very normative implications for our legal system. And we have some unalienable rights that come from God. They don't come from a monarch. But these fundamental values should be respected. We did that in Hungary, for instance, when we changed our constitution. The very first sentence of the Hungarian constitution is, God bless the Hungarians. And the role of Christianity is acknowledged in preserving Hungarian liberty, Hungarian freedom, and the Hungarian nation. So this is one fundamental thing that, that we should not neglect. Second, we already mentioned the topic of foreign policy. Yes, and this has, again, some relevance. Well, not just some, but a lot of relevance to the Americans as well, because some of the foreign policy decisions made in the context of the common foreign and security policy are also can be relevant to the American foreign policy as well. Just think about one issue. We saw the horrific events last year on October 7 in Israel, and what was the response of some European institutions? And what voices we heard from EU circles who were influenced by the BDS movement and all kinds of voices against Israel. And there are just a very few states in the European Union, and Hungary is among them, that actually stood up for Israel and is a very loyal and strong partner for Israel. And this is, again, just an example of how some CFSP questions might be relevant also for transatlantic security interests. Right now, as the other speakers mentioned, there's a tendency to centralize power and make CFSP so-called qualified majority voting, which would basically mean that they're taking away the rights of the member states, EU member states, of pursuing their own foreign policy. This is something that we're totally against. I mean, you're basically, foreign policy is the basic function, one of the basic functions of a country. So also in your report, we very much agree with what you put in your report regarding CFSP. These decisions must remain in the hands of the member states. Third issue, security and resiliency. You already mentioned illegal immigration. Yes, here in Europe in 2015 and 2016, we had a big crisis. And we saw that the European institutions are unable to give a normal and give the right response to a security question that is impacting the lives of 10 millions. It was the member states, it was the Central European nations who stood up against illegal immigration and having people from a different background coming to our countries. So we had to stop them. And Hungary was in the forefront of this fight, as you probably know, by building the fence, building a legal barrier, and basically we became really an example that illegal migration can be stopped if there is the political will to do that. And we work closely with our friends here in Central Europe. The Poles, the Slovaks sent border patrols to our borders. So it was really a close cooperation. But again, it was a national sovereign decision that had to be made here. For the United States, what's relevant here? I think we all agree that the resilient and strong Europe is in our common interest. We see in other countries the consequences of illegal immigration with terrorist attacks, anti-Semitic attacks, and pro-Hamas protests. So it really created a mess. Again, it's the member states that can and should have the competence to fight illegal immigration. Of course, European institutions should help this process and should not fight actually the member states who are tackling the illegal immigration. With regards to security, another aspect, it's defense. As you can see, and it's a very good example that actually by reinforcing our national sovereignty in defense, spending more on our own defense, it actually adds to our collective security. So all those nations that decided to put more funding into and increase their defense spending as required by the NATO treaties and achieving the 2% threshold, it actually increased also the resiliency of our region. And another example, the 3Cs initiative. In contrast to Brussels, where all these crazy green policies are prevalent, and Brussels is spending huge amounts of money on utopian green policies. Actually, we need to build pipelines, and we need tangible results. We need concrete results. And the 3Cs initiative, which was a close cooperation between the Trump administration, our Polish friends, the other nations in the region, is a very good example of this. Lastly, culture and education. It's not enough to protect our national sovereignty, but we also have to be proactive. We have to take care of our children. We have to take care of the next generation. It's really unfortunate what we see on college campuses, what we see on what's being taught in various universities. Instead of teaching science, ideology is taught. So we have to be proactive, and we have to stop this. We have to stop liberals hijacking and capturing our institutions. So in a nutshell, this is how we see, or how I see the relevance of national sovereignty for the West and our transatlantic cooperation. The question, of course, is what's next? I think after November, we will know more, but definitely this is an area that we have to work on, and more events like this have to happen in the future. So look forward to seeing you at CPAC Hungary next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Having just a few minutes left in our panel, I will ask this question open and leave it open to you. Your question, what's next, is very important, and we also should seek some answers, institutional answers, for the risks and threats that we face now with the rise of European empire or European superstate. What should be the institutional response? Maybe some concrete institutional amendments to European Union that may bring about this project of European cooperation to a sane, realistic level of cooperation of sovereign states, rescuing us, safeguarding us from rise of Brussels bureaucracy that we are facing now.
Yes, if I may propose something. I think today in the treaty you have various kinds of air of confidence. You have the community policies, you have the shared responsibilities, you have the cooperation, we should have just two. Community policies, policy that we decide to do in common, and when we manage it in common, as we did with agriculture policy, transport policy, and then all the rest should be left in the hands of a national government. When they decide to cooperate, or they cooperate among themselves without EU institution, or they decide to build a common policy, but then that means that each member state, asking, of course, to the population, will agree of a transfer of sovereignty. It should be clear. Today, with this shared responsibility, we create a Pandora box which allows the European Commission to use this shared responsibility to take more and more responsibility. This is just my short suggestion. Thank you very much.
Any other comments on that?
I believe on a political level, we should increase the consensus between us in supporting countries against policies which are extremely bad for them. Enforcing the open policy borders on Italy, on France, on Spain, it's obviously making them weaker. It's bad for them. It's loading up the social systems, it's creating crime, it's creating poverty, it's creating unemployment, it creates no-go zones, it basically creates a third world inside Europe in the suburbs of the big cities. So this is a thing where we should be in extreme consensus and force this consensus in our home country through the public opinion on the politicians in order to support each other, no matter where the country is. Destroying the Netherlands farmers will make Netherlands weaker. This is not good for us. All the bad decisions that were taken in Germany regarding their energy system, closing the nuclear factories and so on, is making the German economy weaker. This is bad for us. Your problems with the EU Commission, first of all, stopping you from pensioning the communist judges and now stopping you from appointing the new ones, elected by the judges, by the way, this is making Poland weaker, not stronger. The problem with Hungary, trying to enforce them, liberal laws and open borders, is making them weaker. Same goes for us, trying to preserve our coal power plants and cheap energy and trying to keep our transport sector, let's say, from the French syndicates or whoever communist there has problems with us offering good service on a good price, which is actually at the core of the European Union, is a problem for us. We need strong states and we need to form a consensus and support each other, no matter what the state is, on a political level or on public opinion level, against the enforced policies which are actually making our countries weaker. And if you let me finish with one example, if you want to stay fit, in a decent shape, basically alive, and your team is a people who are morbidly obese and barely move, and you train every day with them, what you do is actually drag your feet 10, 15 minutes and go home. Chances are that in a few years, we will also be, your results will drop, and chances are that you might also be morbidly obese. If you run with the best athletes, if they are your team, yes, at the beginning, your lungs will burn, your feet will hurt, but chances are that in a few years, you will be also a good athlete. So we want our team to be from the best. We want strong countries next to us. We want countries with strong political system, with strong economies, with strong armies, and we want the European Union to be constructed by strong national countries.
Several years ago, there was a general consideration that the national state is losing their importance because the global challenge requires global answers. But what's happened after the economical crisis and after the COVID crisis and after the migration crisis, it was very clear that the national state became the only organization which was able to handle that kind of crisis. That means the importance of the national state in the future is very, very important. And if we would like to see the much more stronger Europe, We have to give back the responsibility of the national states and also the elected politicians, not the bureaucracy, because the bureaucracy has the not very well-defined lobby interests behind them. And they are not elected to do that. The people who elected, they have to implement what they promised the voters.
Thank you very much.
And of course, on a political level, we have to do our homework in each and every country of ours. We have to put in the government forces that support sovereign nations of Europe. And this is our responsibility. We have to do our homework. We are the C Patriots for Europe, for instance, which is, as you know, a new faction and party in the European Union, now the third largest. And I hope more and more parties will join, but certainly a closer cooperation among the conservative forces in the European Parliament is very much needed for a change in the future. But we also need to change in some countries of Europe the governments, because the European Council, of course, and the Council of Europe is made up by the heads of state and heads of government. So, and the decisions will be made by them. So we have some homework to do, and Hungary is a good example that we can change things, but we also need allies.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that panel. Thank you very much for those closing remarks we had concerning sovereignty as it is and the role of sovereignty in protecting national interests. And thank you very much for being with us. Thank you very much, James Carafano, for the heritage partnering in this organization, in organization of this conference. Thank you very much to our panelists and audience for being with us today, to our donors and friends, because of whom it was possible to hold this conference on international level. And I have to say that there was one point during today's conference that I was afraid, that I felt threatened. When Kacper Kita was late for 20 seconds to get on the stage. And I'm not joking. I thought maybe he was arrested and is held captive somewhere in Poland. The situation is like that. If somebody from the right side is late, you do not think that there was a traffic jam. You rather think that he might got arrested somewhere and you need to send your lawyers there. So don't do that anymore, please. And in fact, your presence here at this conference is also a very important sign of support for the Polish constitutional order and the Polish democracy. And today we are facing an open new doctrine in Poland. It was already named by Prime Minister Tusk as militant democracy or transitional justice. And those words are nothing but pretexts and excuses to violate constitution, violate rule of law, and imprison political enemies. So thank you very much for being with us, because it is also important for the conservatives in Poland to feel better and feel safer in our own country. Thank you very much. It was the last panel of today. All the panelists and our guests who are enrolled on the workshop are now invited to join the workshop, and we will follow up with the Chatham House Rules meeting on sovereignty and European Union. Thank you very much.